We think we know the people around us. The quiet neighbor, the guy who does odd jobs in the community. But what if one of them was hiding a lifetime of the most horrific crimes imaginable? Well, this is the story of Peter Tobin, a man who lived right in plain sight for decades, with a monstrous secret hidden behind a totally ordinary face.
Our story really kicks off in a place that's supposed to be a sanctuary, a church in Glasgow back in 2006. But inside these walls, a crime is about to be uncovered that will just shatter that peace and unravel a story so much more terrifying than anyone could have ever guessed.
And the main suspect? He was a man the community knew as Pat McClellan. Just a quiet, unassuming handyman at St. Patrick's Church. You know the type, someone who just blends into the background, completely unremarkable. And that, right there, was his greatest weapon.
So he was arrested pretty quickly. And for the police, it seemed like an open and shut case. A terrible, violent crime for sure, but they figured they had their guy. They thought the story ended right there. But they were so wrong. Because as soon as investigators started to look into the background of this Pat McClellan, they started pulling on a thread that began to unravel a whole lifetime of lies. They found a web of fake names, a history of violence, and the horrifying truth. This murder wasn't a beginning. Oh no. It was the final, bloody chapter in a very, very long story.
So, how did this handyman's mask finally slip? Well, it all started with his last fatal act, the one crime that brought his entire world of secrets completely crashing down.
Angelika Kluk was just 23, a Polish student working at the church to help pay for her education. Tobin, going by the name Pat McClellan, attacked her right there in the presbytery. The details are brutal, but what's just bone-chilling is the discovery that she was probably still alive when he hid her body, right under the floorboards of the church she served.
At his sentencing, the judge's words really hit home. A truly evil man. It was a powerful statement, for sure. But at the time, nobody in that courtroom could have known just how true those words were. The evil they were looking at, it was just the tip of the iceberg.
This conviction, this was the key. For the very first time, the police had his real name, Peter Tobin, and with that name, they could finally start to really dig into his past, to follow the thread of his life and see where it led. They had no idea it was about to take them back decades, right into the middle of some of Britain's most haunting cold cases.
As police started mapping out Tobin's life, a seriously chilling timeline began to take shape. I mean, look at these gaps. 1991, 2 teenagers just disappear. Then in 94, he goes to jail for a horrific attack on 2 other girls, but he gets out in 2004. This timeline didn't just show what he'd done, it basically screamed the question, what else was he doing in all those years he was free?
And that very question led investigators to a perfectly ordinary-looking suburban house in Margate, Kent. It was just one of many places Tobin had lived over the years. But this one was different. He lived there in 1991, the exact same year that Vicky Hamilton, one of those teenagers from their timeline, had vanished.
So police started a careful search of the property, and in the small, unassuming garden of 50 Irvine Drive, their worst fears came true. They started digging, and first they found the remains of one body. Then, incredibly, they found a second. The secrets Tobin had literally buried almost 20 years before were finally seeing the light of day.
The 2 bodies were identified as Vicky Hamilton, who'd vanished from Scotland, and Dinah McNichol, who was last seen hitchhiking in Hampshire. Think about that. 2 completely separate cold cases. 2 families who had been tormented for 16 long years. They finally had answers. And Peter Tobin had 2 more murder convictions.
Okay, so now we're at 3 murders and a history of brutal sexual violence. For the police, this wasn't about a single killer anymore. This was about a monster who had been operating for decades. They had to know how many more victims were there. To find out, they launched one of the biggest investigations of its kind in British history.
It was called Operation Anagram, and the task ahead of them was just monumental. Tobin was like a ghost. He'd used over 40 different aliases, drifting from town to town, job to job, all over the UK. The police had to piece together this entire phantom life, just to see if his path ever crossed with the countless other women who had vanished without a trace.
48. In a chilling boast to a prison psychologist, this is the number of victims Peter Tobin claimed to have killed. It's a staggering number, one that would make him one of Britain's most prolific serial killers. The question for investigators was terrifying. Was it just a monstrous lie or a horrifying confession?
So the operation re-examined dozens of cold cases, looking for any connection. Cases like Louise Kay, who vanished from an area where Tobin was working, or Jesse Earle, found murdered near where he lived. The patterns were there. The coincidences were just chilling. But actually proving the links? That was a whole other story.
So, despite this huge effort by Operation Anagram, which was officially shut down in 2011, the full truth about Peter Tobin, it just remained out of reach, and the biggest questions about his life of crime still lingered.
And one of the biggest questions of all was a ghost from Scotland's past. Could Peter Tobin actually be the notorious Bible John, an unidentified serial killer who murdered 3 young women in Glasgow way back in the late 1960s? I mean, if that were true, it would solve one of the nation's most infamous cold cases.
Now, the theory was pretty compelling. Tobin had roots in Glasgow, a known history of violence against women, but the hard evidence just didn't add up. Investigators confirmed he had a solid alibi. His own marriage certificate proved he was in Brighton when 2 of the murders happened. And the real clincher, his DNA was not a match to a sample they found on one of the victims. Peter Tobin was a monster, for sure, but he wasn't Bible John.
So, after he got his 3rd life sentence in 2009, Tobin was given a whole life order, which meant he would die in prison. And that's exactly what he did in 2022, taking the full truth of all his crimes with him to the grave.
In the end, there was no one. No family came forward to claim his body. He died just like he lived, isolated, hated, and without ever taking responsibility for the lives he destroyed. His ashes were scattered at sea, leaving no final resting place, no monument to his evil.
And that leaves us with this one chilling question: how many more secrets died with Peter Tobin? He was convicted of 3 murders, but police and pretty much everyone who studied the case believed there were more. Was his boast of 48 victims just the ramblings of a narcissist, or was it a final terrifying glimpse into a depth of evil we'll never fully understand? That's the legacy of Peter Tobin, a ghost who walked among us, leaving a trail of shattered lives and unanswered questions that will probably haunt us forever.